Okay, so I guess I could have titled this, or we could have titled this, Mathematics in First Nations Cultures in Western Canada. I'd like to begin with just a comment. I'm going to give a rather quick historical overview. This is not a talk about ethnomathematics. This is a talk discussing the educational situation for the Aboriginal population in British Columbia, principally Western Canada, a little more generally, and the practical part of the work having to do with carrying out the educational outreach that's associated with this set of problems has been worked on by my colleague, Veselin, who will be talking about that activity. And first, I'll just give you a little bit of background to the situation with education generally. So here I have a statement about the Indian problem. It's not, there are statements of this kind going back considerably further to the effect that the old potlatch customs, these are cultural activities which consist of getting together and the host giving away large quantities of goods. These are the ceremonies in which most marriages were both arranged and carried out. They were associated with many kinds of cultural activities and so forth. And these kinds of activities were not thought of well by the administrators of that came in connection with the colonial administration. Now, I'm speaking completely about British Canada, and I'm speaking about Western Canada. And the civilizing mission in Britain that had been directed at the working class was very similar to the kinds of things that were taken on for the native population as far as the content was concerned. And the idea that industrial schools or training on the job or something of that kind was paramount. Arithmetic and geometry were generally regarded as indispensable, although some argued that mathematics, or arithmetic in particular, was a dangerous subject, and that in fact it might induce an antipathy in the future worker to doing boring, repetitive tasks prematurely. Nevertheless, the thought that arithmetic should be taught prevailed. Now, the situation with the local cultures in Canada and Australia in particular, it's not the only place, they were generally seen as just heathen savages as opposed to merely heathens, as in India and China. And there was no genuine culture to be replaced. And the key features then of the educational endeavor were to remove all traces of the original culture by attempting to inculcate English speaking and Christianity, as well as the possibility of being good productive workers by not engaging in things like 2-week-long religious observances at inconvenient times for the forestry and mining industries. So mathematics was part of this. Indians became part of the portfolio of the Canadian government when Confederation took place in 1867. British Columbia joined in 1871. British Columbia is unusual in Canada by virtue of the fact that there were virtually no treaties. A very small amount of land, really not much larger than the city of London in a region that's the size of half of Western Europe, was governed by treaty. And the Aboriginal situation, the indigenous situation, there is extremely complicated. There are around 32 different language groups, many more individual languages, and there is a gradual evolution of a one-sided decision-making process that comes from the federal government and dictates essentially fewer and fewer rights for the natives, and in particular cultural rights, so that one couldn't do religious observances, one couldn't perform dances, one couldn't wear native costume, and so on and so forth without permission. Now, it's difficult to enforce these things because this is a very large territory, and so these processes continue to happen for a long time, but despite being outlawed, since the 1880s. But by the 1920s, this process was more or less complete. Part of the process was to create residential schools, and I expect you can't really read this slide. I can barely read it from here, but I'll just point out this is a document that was cited in a Canadian report saying that the way to go with educating the natives was to move them off their own reserves and have them educated in residential schools. This was to be done as cost effectively as possible, so that the schools would be set up in areas that were away from the villages, and the children who were involved in these schools would be put to productive work, raising animals and so forth, or fishing, doing logging, things that took up approximately half the day being devoted to schoolwork. The residential schools were designed to take children in from the villages from the age of 5 or 6. Speaking any language other than English was not allowed, and infractions were punished. One could be strapped or caned for both social offenses like speaking a native language or talking back to a teacher, and for academic ones, such as obstinate failure to learn multiplication tables. We know this from direct testimony. Now, it's important to know about these residential schools that they're a locus for exaggerated punishment and abuse. And it has been clearly documented to the point that the Government of Canada, a government that at the moment is very little inclined to acknowledge such things, in 2008 this led to an apology by the federal government, cash settlements to surviving members of the residential school population, and an ongoing now Truth and Reconciliation Commission in which the detailed history of abuse in each of the locations is being taken up. Now, I think that it got taken off the slide for the purposes of brevity, that these began in the 19th century and ended in 1996. So that there are still many people living who are referred to as survivors of the residential school experience who have gone through this process. I'll just give you a quick example before turning over to Veso of one of the earlier schools. This is the Ahusat Indian Residential School. It was operated by the Presbyterian Church and later on by the United Church when that happened. The building was owned by the Women's Missionary Society. There were various kinds of problems with it. It was a place where there were fights between Presbyterians and Catholics for the rights to run these schools. The indigenous people complained about this, and the fact that the natives were frightened and compelled to sign a paper and give up their children to these Presbyterian teachers. But nevertheless, these kinds of complaints were routinely ignored. They had to be made to the man known as the Indian agent, like Halliday, who was quoted on the first slide. And just to give you an idea of the situation, Ahusat is on Flores Island. It's near the P in Port Alberni there on the west coast of Vancouver Island. That's about 350 kilometers by sea from Vancouver. It's an extremely remote location. It's still an extremely remote location. There are no roads. If you want to go there now, you have to hire a boat or get a plane. Here is a group of students being taught to be Brits, or British Canadians, or British Columbians in around 1910. And it's almost poignant, I'll merely comment at the end of this, to read some of the inspectors' reports, which describe the glowing successes and the fact that the children enjoy this, also describing the curriculum. So we have, here's long division, is that critical feature of life. British flag and Union Jack are also taught. And the kindergarten or infants classes were exercised in sounds, counting and so forth, and in the evening they were amused and instructed in sewing figures upon cardboard. So we have many of these inspectors' reports and many remarks from teachers that are given in to the inspectors, and we have quite a detailed picture then of the colonists' experience at the time of what they were doing. And there are not great traces of guilt, one might say, about this set of activities. But in any case, as Veso will now point out, this is a largely successful operation. These cultures are many of them virtually on the brink of extinction. And this poses a particular set of educational problems, which Veso will now discuss.
Thank you, John. So, this is from 2011 Canadian National Household Survey. There are about 1,400,000 Aboriginal people in Canada, and they make about 4.3% of total Canadian population. They are divided in three major groups. First Nations, that is what we would call North American Indians. Métis is a particular group in which white father and a native mother, the parents. And the Inuit is a compact group that lives very north of Canada. In British Columbia, the percentage is a little bit higher, 5.4%. And the First Nation, Métis. But what is interesting for British Columbia, about 22%, only 22% of Aboriginal population live actually on reserves. More people live in Vancouver, the largest city in British Columbia, than in reserves. So the Aboriginal population is young. It is striking actually to see that the average age of Aboriginal population in Canada is 29. In British Columbia is 29, comparing with 42 of general population. 26% of the Aboriginal population in BC is under 15 years of age. And that is the problem. What is that society needs to do to help educate this wave of young Aboriginal population coming? And that is a big concern both for Aboriginal communities and the whole society. And the problem is extremely complex. Any issue you can think of is included in dealing with education of Aboriginal people in BC and in Canada in general. So this is data from our university, and you could see that about exactly 258 students are in Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. Only 40 in science and only 21 in applied science. Applied science at Simon Fraser covers engineering and computing science. The size of the Faculty of Arts and Social Science has about 8,000 students, and Faculty of Science about 5,000. At the graduate level, you see that most of them are going to education. And in applied science, there are only 3. In science, only 6 Aboriginal students. And that makes this percentage of the total student population. And the question is why? Why is this? And it is commonly accepted that mathematics is one of the stumbling blocks. And really, the research has been done on this issue, and here, if you read the second bullet, only 5 to 6% actually of Aboriginal population, or Aboriginal high school population, complete Math 12. That is a pre-calculus course. That is actually requirement for calculus, comparing with 26 to 27% in the non-Aboriginal population in BC. So this is the claim. The claim is that for Aboriginal students, low completion rates in pre-calculus grade 12 course imply their low participation in science and applied science courses. And then a corollary, if you accept this claim, the corollary is that if you're going to increase participation of Aboriginal people in applied science and science, then better if you do something before they come to that grade 12 mathematics. Just a few facts. This is the Aboriginal communities map. There are 250 Aboriginal bands or First Nation bands in BC. And this is the language map, and Tom mentioned, those are different languages. Those are different languages if you think about Russian and English. And everything in between. First Nations remember their history. I witnessed a conversation in which some war from 150 years ago was discussed between people from different nations. They remember that stuff. They remember colonization. They're talking about genocide. And you could see the most mild people when they come up to this topic, getting quite agitated there. Racism is alive. That, this is my personal opinion, but I think that, in my experience, it seems that racism against Aboriginal people is the last socially acceptable racism that is present in BC. Stereotyping. I was discussing an issue about education of Aboriginal students with a colleague, and she said, "Oh, I had an Aboriginal student 5 years in my class, and that is the reason that I know how." And residential schools did their job. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you a little clip with various Aboriginal languages, and it is extremely difficult to find a fluent speaker in some of those Aboriginal languages. So school system in BC is quite complicated. These are some types of schools that I visited in the last few years. The common denominator for all these schools is the set of learning outcomes set up by provincial government. I have to say that I was traveling all across the province, and most of the classrooms are well kept. You can go to very remote school and you will find a classroom. So this photo there is from a school in a rural area, one classroom for all classes, immersion school. So half of the day is in their language and the other half is in English. But you can find all technology there that is needed. Some of those schools are really beautiful. Schools on reserves are coordinated by this First Nation School Association. I listed here their priorities, and you could see that numeracy is not one of them. A body that coordinates education of Aboriginal people across BC is this First Nation Education Steering Committee. And they pay attention to mathematics. They have regular workshops for math teachers. And they have a very nice logo. Let's see. Situation in schools is quite complicated. So Simon nation lives on maybe 300 kilometers north from Vancouver. They don't have a school on their reserve, and they send all their kids in the school that is, the public school that is in the city, Powell River, that is about 3 kilometers away. Many reserves, they have their own schools on their ground. But it happens that many parents decide that they would like to send their kids to public schools. And that is a problem. I had a chance to talk to quite a few principals. They were complaining that same people that would send their kids to school, public schools, actually making decisions about schools that are on reserves. In these public schools, you could see that in most of those classes, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students are just young people going to the same classroom and sharing their educational experience. But you also have classes that you really feel the wall between two groups. Every school district in BC has an Aboriginal support worker. And those support workers are really the best news for this, in all this issue. They're passionate, they're caring, they're fighting for every student. Here is one support worker from a small city called Cranbrook in the northeast part of BC, and my two volunteers. Both of them are First Nations and SFU students. And then we are in another school in Kamloops. Role models. That is maybe the biggest problem for young Aboriginal people. They don't have role models. For many of those young Aboriginals, they are first that are going to complete high school in their generation. Here, I was teaching a group of Aboriginal students in our bridging program, and I teach them how to make a hexasticks. Have you had a chance to see hexasticks? That's a quite complicated, I don't know how, if you can see it here. It's a quite complicated object that puts sticks in 3 different directions. And it's a little engineering project. And there I showed that to my students, and next day I get this photo from one of those students. She told that to her kids. And that is something that we are trying to contribute to the community. And motivation also for these students that we are starting with the studies at the university at a mature age. I'm going to talk about our program a little bit later, but part of that program is really to introduce role models to these students. And this is a comment from one of the teachers. The alternate school. Alternate school in BC means those are students that don't fit in general student population. Those are students that you as a teacher don't want to have in your classroom. And we were visiting one of those schools, and one of my volunteers who completed a PhD in computing science last summer, and he's a postdoc here in England now. He comes in front of these kids, and he says, when I was your age, I was in a class like this. So, about our outreach program. The idea is to promote mathematics among Aboriginal youth and general population. This is our hero, small number. And a little bit later you will see some of his adventures. this was inspired by a workshop in Banff in 2009. And the idea or conclusion of that workshop was that if we want to promote mathematics among Aboriginal people, if we want to teach them, then we should start early and we should try to find some cultural context. And this is what we do. We go to schools, we have math camps, we create these animated films, we create these bilingual picture books, and we organize annual workshop for Aboriginal students in math and science. And in 3 years, we were able to visit 60 schools and reach about 4,000 students. We created 5 stories, and we got those stories translated in 9 First Nation languages. We reached about 12,000 people, or those films were visited about 12,000 times. The money, $80,000, and that was a combination of a grant that we got from the federal government and from our university. There are 14 volunteers, including myself, and 2 part-time administrators that ran this program. But realistically, what is that we can do? It's a huge problem, it's a small group of people, and we really don't know much about all these complex issues. So our goal at the very beginning was to create a math outreach program that would rather de-alienate mathematics than to teach it. And what is that we do? We go to those classrooms and we talk to students from kindergarten to grade 12. And we try to convince them that if they look around themselves, they are going to recognize mathematics. We always bring our mathematical toys and shapes that they can touch it, that they can see, that they can count. Do that. Also, part of our workshop is always we teach them how to build an object called integrity. That is a little engineering project, and that is almost something that almost always happens. Kids get this project quicker than their teachers. You should see how proud they are when they show to their teacher, so you do this, you do this, you do that. We make a difference. So this is from a message that I got from one of these Aboriginal support workers. And she observed that this young man in high school, who apparently was not able to do anything on his own, was able to put this little object that he created together. Or this one. This is from a grade 5 student. I don't know if you can read it, but he said, and 5 grade. In British Columbia, that is 11 years old. I never thought I would write this, but ever since you came to visit, I have been a bit more into mathematics. But there is also something that in grade 5, they already think, oh no, mathematics is not fun. And everybody likes Pi Day. Our animated films, these are the languages, and I'm going to run a short clip that you can hear sounds of those languages. Those films are included in the language learning section of this international project that is dealing with reach. This is a message that I got from Dr. Henry Kamler from Munich. So he discovered our films, and those are films are always with some mathematical theme. And he used those films in Munich to teach his students how to deal with this language from First Nations. And again, we don't do anything special, really. But the issue is that there is nothing there. And that is why there is such a demand. This is a message from the gentleman from Saskatchewan. And maybe just the last sentence. We do not have very much education material in Cree and that is a really problem. Those First Nations, they would like to keep their culture, they would like to keep their languages. But at the same time, they live in this world where they need engineers, where they need computing sciences, doctors, lawyers, business people. So they need mathematics to function. And how to put that together? So, this is our conclusion. I mean, this cultural part in promoting mathematics is important. But it is not sufficient. Really, at least in BC, to really address this issue, there are some much more difficult questions of socio-economic conditions, the large part of the population that needs to be addressed. And this is one of our books, and this is our Adventures of Small Number.
Small number comes to 100. It sits out here. Small number and the old canoe.
Most I use reasonable Kiala, Nandus, Bala.
Number squares quake to smut. Squake not to stop. Spin top of crossway.
Yeah, that chart. At the ears. As we can sound.
Held Kakam. What host Ashton podcast called Ukot Kakam.
Is why you dear. Hadix, no waki.
Katsta, Mu, Sucha, Kohakitusi, or Atlahatapachet.
Small number in the basketball tournament.
Oikutiushims. Iso Kaksem Kutodgotas Chichui. Atakaksem out.
Magisawia, Mamocha Chastapi. Kuisno Adisamana, Muchuamana. Suasgamia. Mamoche Suhapiwi, Itapaluchibuito.
Namatu Ulstatsen, the mid Sakamuchi. I could steep a Nancy. And Nixie is Stakamuchi. Imata could steep a Sistigoa. Small number in the skateboard park.
Chukchangas no. These are the ones that I asked on the Daily. Daily decent.
Small number and the salmon harvest.
That's it for shame. 8 months, but we are yours to the waste.
Heo, Wood. Nukujas or Tlukwens. Sukwens Aju is Sturgeon.
But he said, Tata, Wakers, Kathas, Skeljanted, Eta, Shortlinted.
And thank you for your attention.